And right now it's time for that time when we have our special guest. Tonight's special guest is Lord Monckton. Lord Monckton, once a policy advisor to Margaret Thatcher, has now become the default leader of the ever-growing number of skeptics questioning the human input into the great global warming scam. We welcome Lord Monckton as our special guest on The Beat Goes On. Lord Monckton, welcome to The Beat Goes On.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you.
What an honour. We've never had a Lord on the programme before.
Well, I must just do the protocol with you then. You should now be on one knee, wearing white gloves and touching your forelock.
Yes, I should.
That's it, except you haven't got a forelock, so we'll let you off this.
Now, a little bit of
formality.
history. A little bit of history about the Lord part before we continue the programme. So you are, in fact, a Viscount? Is that how you pronounce it?
That's right. Now, you should understand, I'm only a hereditary peer. I have no right to sit or vote in the House of Lords. I say I'm a member of it. They say I'm not. I'm about to sue them to get the right to sit and vote in it, but they don't know that yet. So, this is the first time I've said that to anyone, but I'm now so angry with them that I'm going to reassert my right to sit. But my grandfather was the first Lord Monckton. He was an advisor to Edward VIII on his abdication. He then went on to be Defence Secretary in Eden's government, resigned 2 weeks before the Suez debacle.
That was a good time to resign, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, he was the Defence Secretary, and he said, look, this is unworkable in practice and wrong in principle. And he was certainly proved right about being unworkable in practice. And of course, there's nothing more unforgivable in politics than to be right when everybody else was wrong. So they kept him out of the cabinet instead of putting him in as Prime Minister, which is what they should have done, and gave him a peerage, which is a sort of way of... because he'd left nicely and didn't make too much of a fuss, they thought, well, they would reward him with that. That's how he got the peerage. My father inherited it. He was the Army's youngest general, and I, in turn, inherited it from him. And the marvellous thing about inheriting a peerage, which used to carry with it until 1999 the right to be a legislator, just because you were born to it, you entered onto your legislative career, as it were, in a sober frame of mind, because you only became a legislator when your father had died. And this lent an air of gravitas and sobriety and thoughtfulness to the House of Lords, which is quite absent in any other legislative chamber. And it's, I think, the one main advantage of having a hereditary peerage. However, I would apply to it the toggle test, which is a thing I use for a lot in politics. If you turn off the hereditary peerage, would anyone ever actually turn it on again? Would they start from scratch and say, we need a hereditary peerage? These days, in the democratic age, no, they wouldn't. So our day, sadly, has gone. But it doesn't stop me hankering after it a bit.
Now, that's a wonderful background, and it's a background that you've used to become a campaigner as an anti-global warmist.
I got into this whole subject by accident, first of all, because I worked for Margaret Thatcher many years ago as one of her policy wonks. There were 6 of us in her policy unit, and I was the only one that knew any science, because I'd studied classical architecture at Cambridge, so I knew a certain amount of mathematics, and if I bumped into a conic section, I wasn't frightened of it, this sort of thing. And I could differentiate an equation without fainting. So, by default, I became the science advisor in the policy unit. Of course, she had a professional head of scientific advice who was a real scientist. But in her policy unit, the kind of young Turks who were backing her, I was it as far as science was concerned. But Margaret, like me, on watching the science unfold, began to realise that it had become overhyped. And so she changed her mind and said so in her autobiography. She said, this is clearly now nonsense, it's been pushed far too far. We can see that people have climbed onto the bandwagon and won't climb off. Governments have climbed onto it, you've got the media climbing onto it. And I then didn't really think about it very much until just 5 years ago, when I was rung up by the CEO of a little boutique finance house in London. And he said, look, I'm worried about this. We're consulting very widely on it. Can you tell me whether global warming is a problem? I said, well, I think it is, but I'll have a look. So I spent a month digging around and did him a 40-page report. So my conclusion was, do not invest heavily in this unless you have guaranteed government subsidies locked in, or you will lose your shirt. And be prepared to pull out before the government pulls out the subsidies, which eventually they will. I wrote a piece for the Sunday Telegraph as a result of this work I'd done for the Merchant Bank. And they published it big. It was a 2,500 word article. And within 2 hours of its publication at midnight on a Saturday night, between then and 2 in the morning, 127,000 people had tried to access the website to hear the other side of the global warming story, which had never been explained in the British newspapers before. And they crashed the website for the first and only time of the Sunday Telegraph, one of Britain's major national newspapers. And so that was really what got me into it. And then the other side began attacking me savagely, personally. And I thought, well, that's odd. Why don't they deal with the science? Then I realised there wasn't anything wrong with the science I'd written. And they were desperate, therefore, to discredit me personally, because they didn't want people knowing the truth about the science. And that I found interesting, because I'd never seen an issue like this before, that had led to me being savagely attacked all over the web by the left and all over the Marxist newspapers, The Guardian in the United Kingdom, savage attacks, which have gone on pretty much ever since. And I thought, well, that is odd. They're obviously up to something, or they wouldn't think it worthwhile to attack a mere layman like me, who happens to have popped his head above the parapet and said, hey, boys, I don't think there's a problem here.
This word, overhyped.
Yes.
Overhyped. That was my first signal that something was seriously wrong with their argument. There's a sort of a shrill screechiness about their writings. Now,
that's very well put.
Now, if there's a meeting on globalization, they're going to be there. They're in the street. Yeah. If the World Trade Organization is meeting, they're in the street. Before the Copenhagen conference, you could see them in the street.
Yeah.
I just think they automatically coalesce around an anti-capitalist banner.
Well,
or
I mean, the
flag.
extremists, yes, but they're the same usual suspects. I call them the traffic light tendency, the greens too yellow to admit they're really reds. Of course there's an element in that. The late Eric Ellington, who was a great friend of mine, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, said to me once, he said, you know, we all left Greenpeace after a few years. And I said, why did you do that? You know, you really care about the environment. He said, yeah, that was the point. The people who came in and joined it didn't. They wanted to use it to destroy the West. They wanted to destroy it from within, and they used Greenpeace and the other environmental organisations so as to battle the West into submission. Well, they're the old-fashioned communists, basically.
Are they?
Yes, they're the people who, when the Berlin Wall came down, were disappointed and looking for a new home. That's what Eric Ellington said.
Yes,
I mean, this is not me talking. This is Eric Ellington. He said this is who they are. He said they're communists, they're fascists, they're totalitarians of every kind, they're haters of the West, they hate democracy, they hate prosperity, they hate freedom. They hate everything the West stands for. They want to destroy it. They've failed with communism, as they had previously failed with fascism. Now they're trying environmentalism. It's the latest anti-democratic, anti-freedom, anti-prosperity, anti-Western movement. The left are masters of what is called process, which is bureaucratic organisation. The word for bureaucratic organisation is process. And the left do this brilliantly. The right can't be bothered, which is why the left so often wins battles it shouldn't have won, because there's nobody fighting them.
So the right can't be bothered, but the left
go politicise everything. And this is where they've made their big mistake, because they've tried to politicise science itself, and you can't, because science is about trying to find the objective truth. And the objective truth is the truth which is true whether you or I or they or anyone like it or not. And that is what they've tried to do. They've tried to say, right, we're going to, because this is a sufficiently foggy subject, climatology is a very slippery subject, it's very difficult to prove anything either way, we will assert one extreme of the possibilities. We will then claim that that is the settled science, and that there's a consensus
everybody has to fall in line.
And everyone must fall in line. Yeah. And now, where did this idea of consensus came from, an agreement that the science is settled and we must now act? It came from a Marxist pressure group in the UK called the Institute for Public Policy Research in the summer of 2006, circulating all the other Marxist organisations around the world saying, look, this issue is ideal for spreading Marxism. What we can do is say the science is settled and that there's a consensus and there can be no more argument about it, and we'll just go on saying that. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not, we'll just say it, and then they'll all come round to our point of view. That's what they did, and up to a point it worked. Trouble was that it's such a dopey line to take that intelligent people began seeing through it and saying, well, no, on a scientific question as complex and slippery as climatology, the idea that the science is settled is obviously barking mad, and you don't need to be a climatologist to see that. And so they're not getting away with saying that there's a consensus. People are no longer buying that.
When did you first notice a change in your favour? Because it has changed. Was it before Copenhagen or after Copenhagen?
Well, at Copenhagen was the moment where it was very clear for the first time that the arguments of those of us who were questioning this nonsense were beginning to be noticed. I'm not saying the press were welcoming them, but they were beginning to give them airtime, a little bit, not much. But clearly that was where it began, I think. And it began because of ClimateGate. The ClimateGate emails, if you read them from 2009, they go back 10 years. And they do tell a story of a close-knit conspiracy, and I will use that word, of these particular people, because they were clearly tampering with data, interfering with editors of peer-reviewed journals, trying to stop their opponents from getting anything published. All these games were being played, which were not the image of the pure halo-covered, white-coated scientist that we'd all been taught to believe. And so I found it very healthy that for the first time people suddenly saw, and people even in the media suddenly saw, that this giant in fact had feet of clay.
Now, I've always compared this whole business to, it's a great saying that a lie is halfway around the world before truth gets its boots on. And I think this is it's been the classic statement about global warming. A lie is halfway around the world before truth gets its boots on. So we're going to say, Lord Monckton, thank you for getting your boots on.
Well, thank you very much. The truth will be heard, and as it says in the Bible, magna est veritas et prevalet. Great is truth, and mighty above all things.
Thank you.